setting up the live feed.
There'll be a few with matchsticks in then.
Hi from Somerset. Hi from Scotland. We're up to 200 already.
Yeah.
Well, there we go. No pressure then, Kevin.
No, none at all.
Will we break the 300 barrier for the first time?
No.
Try singing "Come Fly With Me." I think we better get some of these attendees on at the end and get them to sing it, actually.
Absolutely.
Put their money where their mouth is.
Well, have a number steadied enough, Andy, to kick off, shall we? Or are we still
rising? Actually, it's
rising. Okay, we'll give it another couple of minutes then.
Another minute or two. We are live on YouTube now. I'm just
steady on 222 for about 223. And it's steady on that.
Yeah.
224. 5.
Still
7.
down.
Yeah, they're still coming in. 228.
New record.
Yeah. Over 230 now.
Well, you did put everyone in the title. You've got everyone.
Very well. Yeah.
Isle of Man, Jersey. Look at this. Fantastic. Welcome the Isle of Man. I think we've probably stabilised out there, Andy, if you want to kick off.
Yeah, I think it's time to get started. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's In the Air Tonight session. Housekeeping from me as normal. You'll notice on the menu at the bottom, if you're on a PC, there's a Q&A icon. If you've got any questions for Kevin at any point, if you type them in there, and at the end of the presentation, we will get to as many questions as we can. If you're just making general comments, if you can just put those in the chat, please. And don't ask any questions in the chat, otherwise we're likely to miss them. We are live broadcasting on YouTube and Facebook at the moment as well, so worldwide audience. And I'll pass you over to Mark for his introduction. Thank you.
Well, thank you all, and yeah, welcome and good evening from myself as well, and also from Andy Sefton, who's one of our panelists tonight, and of course Kevin. Kevin Caton is going to be talking tonight about aerobatics for everyone. And just to reiterate what we was probably you picked up on earlier, we're now breaking new records of attendees. We're sort of heading for circa 250 attendees, which is absolutely wonderful, and we've still got more capacity to go, so we'll press it for the next sessions. And but I just want to hand over to Kevin, please, and let him take us through the session for this evening. Kevin.
Okay, thanks, Mark, and to both Andys, and good evening, everyone. And I believe from checking where the participants are, it might be good afternoon in some cases. So particularly welcome if you're in from a long way away. So as the title says, this session's about radio-controlled aerobatics, something I've been involved with for an awful lot of years now. I'm pitching it at the Club Radio Control Flyer, who will have sort of heard of aerobatics or might have seen it, but not necessarily has a top-class aerobatic plane or wants to enter a competition at this stage. Like some of the other presentations that we've seen, I've got a PowerPoint stack. I'm going to talk a little bit about what you need and what you don't need to get going in aerobatic flying. Why I think you should have a go. Why I think it's a good thing for anybody as a pilot. I'll talk about setting up your aircraft. I'll talk about setting up yourself, which is probably just as important. And then finally, we'll get onto the sort of steps and building blocks of aerobatic flying. So before we get into that, just a little bit about me. I'm not going to bore you to death with my life history. My introduction to radio control flying, in fact, all aspects of aeromodelling, is very similar, I guess, to many people of my era. My dad was an aeromodeller. He started as a kid, so I never stood a chance really. It was in the blood. I started with free flight and control line in my teens. My dad was a radio flyer. He taught me to fly, and for quite a while we were just club flyers. I come from the northwest of England. We didn't travel much out of the area, but I went along in the mid-70s to an interclub aerobatic competition, and it was the first time I'd seen an aerobatic plane, and in those days it had a screaming two-stroke engine. The performance was just nothing like I'd ever seen, and I was just mesmerised. I thought, that's great. I'd love to be able to fly a plane like that. So Dad and I went away and tried building something, and didn't leave the area again for quite a while. But eventually we found about the Great Britain RC Aerobatic Association, which had only been formed a year or two previously. We joined that and entered a competition in the depths of central Lancashire, which was a long way for us in those days, and went along and took part in that. And that went quite well, actually. I was still a junior, but I did okay at that competition, and by that time I was pretty much bitten. Now, what's happened between then, which was 1980, and 2020, that's 40 years ago, an awful lot. I've played the long game in aerobatics. I sort of gradually worked my way through competitions across the UK. I've done okay over the years. Those that have been around a while will know some of the names. I've flown alongside people like Ken Binks and Terry Westrock when they were at the top of the game in the UK. And right along to the current day, where I'm flying against people whose names might not be quite as familiar, or equally they may. People like Keith Jackson, who writes in one of the magazines, Matt Hoyland, who's won the Nationals a few times. So I've been at it a while, and like most people, all the other things that take place in your life have affected me too, mainly positively. So a job and a wife and children, 2 daughters that are growing up now. So all those things. But in model flying terms, it's been with me for an awful long time. I've also, over the years, been fortunate enough to get in the UK team. I've actually flown in the British team at World and European Championships on 17 occasions now, over the last 25 years. You'd think I'd have got the message by now. I'm never going to win the World Championships or the European Championships, but it is a great honour to go and represent your country abroad, as well as the sort of technical and logistical challenges of doing that. So that's me, and that's probably enough. So let's talk a bit about what aerobatics is and why we should all have a go at it. So next slide is. So why would you want to fly aerobatics? I started by asking a few people who I've known. Some have been flying aerobatics for a couple of years, some have been flying as long as I have. What do you enjoy about aerobatics, in a couple of sentences? And there was a few things came from the responses. Nobody said it's because it makes me feel superior to the pilots. And nobody said it's because I want to win a competition. It was all about the personal satisfaction of flying the plane to the best of your ability and to the limit of its capabilities, and getting there. And that's why we go out and put the hours of practice in. It's not necessarily for the adulation, it's the satisfaction of being able to do it as well as you can. There's a couple of practical points. If you're used to seeing your aeroplane flying upside down towards you, one wing pointing towards the ground, things like that. If you ever get into that sort of situation accidentally, you've got a fairly good chance of being able to fly your way out of it if you practiced it beforehand. It'll also, perversely, it'll help to stop you getting into those situations in the first place. So that, overall, that makes you a safer pilot. You're more predictable. People aren't going to go hiding behind the cars when you take off, because you're going to be flying the plane in some unusual configurations, but generally in a predictable part of the sky. And I saved the best one for last, of course. We all like flying our planes, don't we? So if you want to get good at doing something, you've got to go and do it a lot. So what could be better? Give yourself that opportunity to learn something, and go and practice, and go and enjoy your flying while you're doing it. Right at the end, I'm going to try and knock down a few myths, but I'm going to start with one now. You don't need thousands of pounds worth of airframe and radio gear and the latest and greatest of motors, whether it's IC or electric. The photo of that plane, that's a Seb Angel. It's a 30 size, but the 50 sized one, I think, is a fantastic plane for people who are club flyers just starting out. Let's be honest, they're not the cheapest thing around. You can build your own. I know most of us nowadays do buy ARTF planes like that. So the 50 size ones, £340, something like that. I see them advertised for. Still available today. It takes a 50 size electric motor. You'd fly it with a 6S LiPo. So you're not having to fork out thousands to be able to get a plane that will fly really well and last you a long time. They're well designed, they're well built. If you fly particularly with electric, you won't have problems with vibration or servo pots and things wearing out. So something like that, if you've got one, great. If you haven't, I can point you in the direction of that size and type of plane, about 1.5 meter wingspan. Radio gear, we're spoiled with radio gear these days. Everything is just really, really good. You can spend thousands, you can spend a few hundreds. A radio that costs you £400 or £500 for a transmitter receiver combo has got features that it would have dreamt about 30 years ago. You've got everything you need with the sort of radio that you see at the club week in, week out. So let's put that one to bed. Yeah, it's a bit more expensive than a foamy, but you don't have to remortgage your house to start aerobatic flying. Another good design there, if you like to look at biplanes, that's also a Seb Art plane, the Miss Wind S, that's a 50 size, another really good plane. They're quite popular, I know, because I've seen a few of them at the introduction to aerobatic sessions that we run at Buckminster each month. So they're a really good plane. So next off, what do we need? For you, I touched on radio. No matter what the capability of your radio, it is worth an hour or two thumbing through the instruction manual again and reminding yourself how to program everything. I'm not suggesting servo reversing and that ought to be obvious. But knowing how to set the servo throws, how to set a function called expo, exponential response, how to pick a switch to select different flight functions, although we are only going to focus on one. But setting a time is also a good idea for when you're training. As I've already said, aeroplane design, I've shown you a couple of typical planes that are really good. If you don't have that, if you fly, particularly if you're in the UK, if you fly the UK's favourite high-wing sports model with its semi-symmetrical wing section, that's fine. It will fly all the aerobatics I'm going to talk about tonight. It's just a little bit harder to fly them accurately than it is with a purpose-built design. And that goes for any class of model flying. As we're in the learning game, being prepared to write down a few notes while you're flying and setting up in the workshop really will pay dividends. There's a lot to remember, and I'm going to rattle off a lot at you tonight. So if anybody wants a copy of the presentation, I'm quite happy to share that around as well. But making notes before you go flying and between your flights is a really good thing to do. And to help with that, a friend to watch you flying is a really good idea. A second pair of eyes on your aeroplane pays dividends when you're learning something. So let's go to the workshop. Setting your plane up in the first place. So allow yourself half a day to do this, 2 or 3 hours in the workshop, just to check everything over and give yourself the best possible chance of your plane flying predictably when you get to the field. Many of you will do this automatically, in which case I'm preaching to converted. But I've seen a lot of planes presented for trim flights and test flying that I've looked over. And I'm thinking, I wouldn't quite do it like that. So I'm just going to give you some recommendations. First things first, eyeball your aeroplane. You don't need lasers or jigs or anything like that. Just have a look round, make sure the tailplane's lined up with the wings, everything's fixed on properly, the control surfaces aren't going to drop off, and they're free to move. If you've been flying your plane a while, still recommend you do this. It's well worth the investment. One thing I would measure, though, is your centre of gravity. Now, anybody that flies free flight or control line would probably not believe that radio flyers might go out without checking the centre of gravity. It does happen. Please measure the C or G. Put it where the designer or the manufacturer says it should be. If they give you a range, put it in the middle of that range. Now, if it's 5 mil out, it's probably not going to make a lot of difference. But if it's 20 mil out, particularly if it's too far back, a couple of centimetres, that could make quite a difference to the way your aircraft handles. So it's worth doing it. Now, depending on the size of plane, it's perfectly okay to balance it on your 2 index fingers. So we do that. But if you've got a 5 kilogram, 2 meter plane, then good luck with that, because it's not that easy. So the bigger the plane, the harder it is to rig up. And I've got to be honest, I use load cells and I measure it all out, but I'm trying to get it to within a few millimeters. It's not necessary when you're starting off. So at least give yourself that best possible chance and get the CG right. A little bit about control linkages. So your plane's going to fly precisely with you moving the control sticks in the right directions. So what you're doing on the sticks needs to translate exactly into what's going on the control surfaces. So all the obvious things that you've seen are going to become more apparent now. So slot-free movement, disconnect your linkages and waggle your rudder and aileron and make sure that they can move over the full direction of travel. I've seen ailerons, particularly where they bind against the inboard edge of the aileron, binds against the fixed part of the wing. You're not going to fly precisely if your aileron doesn't move when you give it a very small command. So just make sure it's all free to move. You don't need sort of nuclear grade linkages with ball races and things like that. That picture is of the rudder on my aircraft I took to the 2019 World Championships. So Z-bends are fine. They're good, slot free, last for ages. So Z-bend on the servo arm's really good. And that's just a standard ball joint onto the rudder clevis there. And that's a good enough linkage for that plane to do knife edge loops. It's absolutely fine. One thing I would strongly recommend is picking the right servo arm so that the let me see my cursor here, so that the axis of the arm is perpendicular to the axis of the servo. So the linkage is a neat 90 degrees. Now, if you use the traditional sort of 4 and 6 spline arms, I think most people are aware, you can rotate them around by 60 degrees or 90 degrees, and the arms will be slightly out of alignment in some orientations, and you'll find the one that sets up your servo exactly at 90 degrees. Chop the other arms off, leave yourself with just the one like that, and that's it, that's set. I don't recommend using sub-trims on your radio to do that. You'll end up with, later on, with too many offsets and things, and when you're trying to fine-tune your trimming, it can get a little bit difficult. So don't be lazy. Get your arm at 90 degrees, unbolt the clevis, give it half a turn or so to get the control surface lined up just right. You only have to do that once. And once it's done for the life of the aircraft. So as I say, don't be lazy on that one. Still in the workshop, I'm afraid. We'll get to the field eventually. Control movement is always an interesting one. I'm often presented with aircraft for test flying again. And after I've done all those sort of rough checks in the workshop or at the field, I usually give the control surfaces a good waggle to full stick deflection. And more often than not, I then say to the aircraft owner, so well, can you halve your aileron throw and your elevator throw and double your rudder? It seems to be a very common thing. We're trying to fly precision aerobatics here. And now the picture I'm showing you is of my monoplane, again, the Element that I flew at the 2019 World Champs. It does have big ailerons, but aircraft do have quite big ailerons nowadays with one servo driving each aileron. But that's the deflection I use. That's maximum deflection, 10 degrees up, 10 degrees down. And that will roll the aircraft in 1 second at cruise speed. So that's as much as you need. If you're throwing your hands up in horror at that and think, how could you fly on that? My response to you is, how can you fly with double that or treble that? Because I couldn't. So this is the first sort of sharp intake of breath moment. That's what I'm going to ask you to set your aircraft up at. Elevator's the same. In this case, a little bit more down than up, because with inverted flight, you'll be holding a bit of down elevator anyway. So that will give you an even response to up or down elevator. Rudder's the odd one out. You need 30 degrees on your rudder as a minimum. When we get to doing stall turns and spins, talk about those later, you need plenty of rudder. To avoid over twitchy responses as well, I strongly recommend using exponential in the direction that will soften the control response around the neutral point. So a good start point is 30% exponential on ailerons and elevator and 40 on rudder. I've listed some of the popular radio brands. Others are available, but for Taba, don't forget Expo is a minus figure to soften the response around neutral. JR, Jetty and Spectrum, it's a plus figure. So make sure you've read your instructions and you know which is which. So that's for reference on elevator. Doesn't look much, does it? But that's enough for normal flight. We'll come to spins in a moment. So that's enough up, and that's enough down. Notice there's a little bit more down than up there. I just touched on that a moment ago. Rudder, big rudder, moving quite a lot, but exponential softens the response there. So that's full left rudder on my aircraft, somewhere around 30 degrees. One thing that is worth checking, a lot of aircraft, particularly the bigger ones, nowadays we use 2 elevator servos, one for each elevator half. Do check that your servos are moving the same amount up and down. There's several ways of doing that, but using, lifting the tail of the plane up and eyeballing it is certainly a good start point. You can also sort of take lolly sticks on the elevator here and make sure they both line up. The rudder gets in the way of being able to see it without some sort of extension on the elevator. So there's a lot of techniques on that, and if you want any more help on how to do that, that's probably something for another day. But do make sure you've got the same amount of up and down on the left and on the right. If you don't, you will find that loops can corkscrew. Moving on then, I don't recommend any fancy settings for landing. I don't sort of subscribe to crow brakes or raising both ailerons or things like that. There's nothing wrong with it, but when you're starting out and learning, it's another switch to remember. And in the heat of the moment, will you remember which switch it is and have you set it? And you can end up putting your crow brakes on in mid-flight if you're not careful. I've seen that happen. So my advice is just avoid that and learn how to land the plane. They've got big enough wings and light enough wing loading. Just get the nose up and a little bit of power on, learn how to fly them in a high drag configuration to land. The one extra setting that I do recommend is spinning. I showed you that sort of minimal elevator throw for normal flight. To make the aircraft spin well, you will need between 50% and 100% more elevator throw. So I recommend there between 15 and 20 degrees with more expo to give it a similar response around neutral. Set that on a switch on your transmitter. If you can label it as a flight condition or a rate, call it spin or something like that. But that's the only switch I'd recommend for starting off. As I say, no more rates than that, because it's a lot to remember when you're flying. So just touched on rates, where to put them. So just a couple of rates, one for normal flying and one for spins. Too many rates, too much to remember. This positioning of your switch that you're going to use in flight is going to be a matter of personal taste. It depends which stick mode you fly, and it also depends very much on how you hold the sticks. So if you're a finger and thumb flyer like I am, and I fly mode 2, as you can see from there, with the throttle on the left, I find operating the switches on the top left at the front of the transmitter, if you can see it close enough, that's switch A and switch B. They're the ones that I can reach with the third finger of my left hand. If you fly mode 1, you might want to try the switches on the other side. I don't know, you'd have to ask a mode 1 flyer. If you fly with your thumbs on the sticks, you might find you can get your index fingers on the switches on the top of the transmitter, and that's more natural. But what's important is that you can find the switch and know what position it's in without letting go of the sticks, and particularly importantly, without looking at the transmitter. We're trying to fly precisely here, so you need to keep your eyes on the plane. So that's something to learn if you haven't already got that skill embedded. Okay, been talking a while and we're still not out of the workshop, but bear with me. A throttle curve is the next thing. I talked about exponential response on the main functions. If you're using an IC engine, you can probably safely ignore this. Just use a linear function on the throttle, and the response characteristic of an IC engine is usually pretty good on a linear function. Electric power is a blessing and a curse. I mean, electric power has given us no bad runs. Your motor's absolutely predictable throughout the flight. There's lots of power, very rapid response. All those things are real bonuses for predictable flying. The one thing that an electric motor often doesn't do, though, is give you enough torque at low RPM. So I'd recommend a response that looks a little bit like that. That's what we call the exponential 2 function, where the pickup is quite sharp at first, and then levels off higher up the power range as you move your throttle stick from idle here up to full power over on the right-hand side. And the reason you want more response in this region is generally when you're coming out of a vertical dive and pulling the aircraft or pushing the aircraft to level flight again. That reduces its airspeed, and you want to be able to put power on quickly to recover the airspeed and stop the plane mushing or dropping out of the sky in some instances. So that helps. Just moving the throttle stick slightly gives you quite a bit of extra power to be able to regain flying speed as you pull out of a vertical dive. Now, this might seem obvious, as it says on the bullet point. Eyesight, I want to both reassure people, but give you a couple of tips. When you're flying aerobatics, you're flying your aeroplane, if it's a 1.5 metre size plane, you're going to be flying it 80 or 100 metres in front of yourself. It doesn't look very big. So if you've got good distance vision, then well done you, that's great. Some of us haven't. But the reason I put the photograph up is those 3 gentlemen, you might recognise some of them, are the podium places at the 2019 World Championships. So left to right, Tetsuo Honda from Japan, Christophe Pezon-Leroux in the centre, and Gernot Bruckmann on the right-hand side. Notice Christophe in the middle, 9 times world champion, 50 years of age when that photograph was taken. Inspiration to every aerobatic flyer in aeromodelling, radar control flyer throughout the world. Christophe's short-sighted. If he took his glasses off, he'd probably crash the plane. So do take heart. If you need glasses to see your plane, go and get some. Pop along to your favourite optician and tell them what you do. Tell them, I fly model aircraft and I want to be able to see the aeroplane that's 1.5 metres long, 100 metres in front of myself, and make them get that vision just right. I've had opticians underdo it in my case. I've got similar distance vision to Christophe, so I need to wear glasses to fly. But if you can, if you have to wear glasses, wear them, but don't worry, you don't have to have the eyes of a sort of hunting bird to be able to fly your plane. A pair of glasses will do you fine. Do use sunglasses. You're going to spend a lot of time staring at the sky. And if your field permits it, try and avoid flying around the sun. But they're all obvious sort of safety things that would be bread and butter to most people. Now we're going to talk about how to use your eyes. Because you've got to look at your aeroplane and work out whether it's going the way you want it to when you're flying aerobatics. So you're staring at a plane which now looks pretty small out in front of you, and it might have a wing low, it might be climbing or diving, it might be young. And your eyes have got to tell your brain and then move your fingers or thumbs to make it not do those things that you don't want it to do, and then to do the thing you do want it to do. And that's okay, most of us can manage that. But if you want to draw some nice shapes in the sky, you also need to be able to see where the plane's going next. And that relies on your peripheral vision. And that's not an easy skill to learn. If there's any opticians or optometrists on here, you might sort of be poo-pooing the thought that you can do both things at the same time. Well, perhaps you can't, but you have to be able to do both in very rapid succession to be able to fly your plane precisely. The picture's only slightly relevant. We're looking at Matt Hoyland there, flying his plane, eyes intently staring at the distance. The guy behind is prompting him with the manoeuvres. The screwdriver is actually to line the pilot up to get his manoeuvres positioned. He's not to poke him in the back when he gets it wrong, in case anybody's wondering that. So those 2 points about using your vision are really the key to it. The fourth bullet down, it seems blindingly obvious. The plane's going to go roughly in the direction it's pointing. However, there's always a wind to contend with, isn't there? This is the UK. It's probably the same pretty well everywhere else in the world. So most of the time, you're going to have some wind, and it will not be blowing up or down where you're trying to fly. It never does. It's always going to be blowing slightly across. So the plane's not quite going to go the way it's pointing. And that's where you need to develop some skills to aim the plane slightly into that little bit of wind component so that it actually tracks in the correct direction. So it's the difference between attitude and flight path for those who are familiar with those terms. Right, finally, let's go flying. So the picture there is Buckminster. Many will recognise that. That's at one of our training days that we run. The pilot under tuition there. He's standing, flying his plane, and there's the manoeuvring zone marked out in front of him. We'll come on to that in the next slide. So aerobatic flying is not done round your head. Most clubs nowadays are set up for flying in front of yourself, so I'm going to assume that most people are capable of doing that and turning the aircraft around at either end and flying a path up and down a flight line. Stand still, pretty obvious again. Many people do tend to wander around when they're under pressure. It's not a good idea. You're trying to fly the plane in a fixed orientation, and if you're moving around, you're only going to make it harder for yourself. So plant your feet in a comfortable pose, stand still, and pivot your neck to watch the aeroplane going up and down and along the flight line. keep the speed up, particularly with electric power. These, I touched on how good electric power is. Because there's instant response, many people fly the plane too slowly. Don't be frightened of putting some power on and using the speed of the aircraft. If it does race away, you can just throttle back, but don't try and do it too slowly, particularly on a windy day. So go big and go fast. And the first thing we're going to do in flight is trim for straight and level upright flight with somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 power. And make sure that it's actually doing this. Something I see very often is a plane flying along a flight line, and every 3 or 4 seconds I see a pitch correction or roll correction. And I prompt the pilot and say, are you sure it's trimmed hands off? And the answer is, yeah. So let go of the sticks, and then the plane starts diving and rolling. So if it's going to take you 10 passes to do this, so be it. Take 10 passes, but keep pushing the trims on the transmitter until you can let go of the sticks, and it's going to keep on along a straight trajectory. And when you finish the flight, then you can adjust the servo clevis, the control link clevises again, and get your trims back in the middle. The aim is, in a day's flying, to get your plane so that the transmitter trims are in the middle and the plane flies straight and level, upright, hands off. There's our manoeuvring zone for aerobatic flights. So the pilot is stood here. We saw the tape marks out on the previous slide at Buckminster. You're stood here, and the plane is going to be flown up and down a track in front of yourself, somewhere between 80 and 100 meters. A bigger plane, you'll be out at 150 meters, which is where we tend to fly our competition flights. This is marked out as if it was a proper competition where you're flying a sequence of maneuvers from center to end, turning around and flying back again. And we have large posts, about 10 meters high, tethered into the ground, which you may have seen at competitions to help the pilot and the helper orientate the aircraft against the background. You won't have that most of the time when you're flying. If you do have something on the horizon, a large structure or a building or a prominent tree or something like that, that's a good thing to look for your center. But at first, I wouldn't focus too heavily on the ends, because we're just going to focus on some center maneuvers tonight. Earlier, I told you to wind down all the control responses, so do spend some time getting used to the responses I've suggested. It might feel a little bit scary at first, but you know, trust me, you'll thank me eventually, because the plane will be less twitchy to fly, and you'll be able to fly it smoothly and gracefully through your maneuvers. So finally, I think that's 20 slides in, but I wanted to cover all that. Let's fly some aerobatics. Now, really, there's only 4 basic aerobatic maneuvers for a fixed-wing aircraft. And they are, as shown there, the loop, the roll, the stall turn, and the spin. And if you can do those, every other maneuver that you'll ever fly in a competition is going to be a combination of 2 or more of those figures. They're either combinations flown in sequence, so an Immelman turn is a half loop followed by a half roll, or for more advanced aerobatics, they are a combination that's concurrent. So a loop and a roll combined will be a rolling loop or a rolling circle. But obviously, first things first, get the basics right, and then moving on will be so much easier. So let's look at a loop. Loops can be circular, they can also be squares, triangles, hexagons, octagons, things like that. But we're just, for the purposes of this, we're just going to focus on a round circular loop. Inside loops are flown with up elevator, obviously. Outside loops, down elevator. And you can fly them from the top or from the bottom. What we're seeing here is an inside loop flown from the bottom into the wind, with the wind blowing from the left to the right. And I'm sure most people who've flown radio control have flown a loop. The plane goes up, it goes upside down, you shut your eyes and throttle back, and then you open your eyes again, and it's come out level again. And that's fantastic. What we need to do next is learn how to fly a nice circle. And I've shown the aircraft at the clock points there, and one that doesn't deviate in or out. The plane doesn't blow away or blow in, or particularly it doesn't corkscrew. And that's a very common thing when doing loops. Extremely common when people are doing outside loops. I think because people practice inside loops more. And the cause is nearly always holding some aileron deflection on while you're moving the elevator stick. Depends on which mode you fly, whether that's going to be a natural thing to do or unnatural. If you fly mode 2 with aileron and elevator on the right stick, it does seem to be quite common to inadvertently apply a little bit of aileron. So the plane will corkscrew out and you'll come out scratching your head wondering what went wrong. And this is where your friend behind, socially distanced, can make his notes and say, you always roll to the right when you're doing that loop, and the plane ends up pointing away from you. And you're going to have to stop doing that. And there's no easy way to learn how to stop it. It's just practice. You need to get used to seeing the plane in all the different clock positions. So if this is the clock face, you start your loop at 6 o'clock, at 9 o'clock here, check whether the plane is still perpendicular to the flight line. At 12 o'clock when it's inverted, check that the wings are level. At 3 o'clock, check that it's perpendicular to the flight line again, and the recovery. Another common thing here is pulling out of the loop too high. And this is where your peripheral vision comes in. So the loop should finish exactly where it started. Not blow back, not corkscrew out. So you see, there's a lot of things can go wrong in just a simple figure like that. And it does take a lot of practice and persistence to get it right. Sadly, there's no shortcuts. You just got to go and fly it a lot. Fly on a windy day, fly on a calm day, fly it crosswind. You can even fly them downwind. Try it all. You'll not get bored, trust me. One piece of advice I would give for looping, certainly in a headwind, is careful use of power and elevator. So any section of your loop which heads into wind, so it's from the 3 o'clock position through 6 up to 9 o'clock, that portion of the loop is your aircraft is moving from left to right against the wind. In these portions, in a headwind, use less elevator than you would in the car and more power, sometimes much more power. But the portion of the loop which flies downwind, so from 9 o'clock through 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock, the wind's going to blow the aircraft along if you don't do anything about it. So a little bit less power and more elevator. The danger then is when the aircraft's inverted, you hardly need any any up elevator because gravity's doing the work for you. But if your airspeed drops off too much, the plane will drop out of the loop and fall out here. So keep sufficient power on, but use a lot of elevator to pull the loop tight here to stop it getting blown back. Then be ready to ease off the elevator and apply power to get it back to the start point. It takes practice. There's no shortcut to this. But if you can remember the more power, less elevator, less power, more elevator, that will help you. So that's it for loops. It's quite easy to describe, but hard to do, like most aerobatic flying. So let's get into rolls. The next one, a roll is a rotation around the axis of the aircraft. The roll rate to aim for, and what I've asked you to set your aircraft aileron throw for, it's about 1.5 to 2 seconds on full deflection for one roll, and that will feel slow, but it gives you time to learn to correct the flight path of the aircraft to stop it dropping through a roll. So if you count at a normal pace, 1, 2, 3, 4 for a roll, that's about the right sort of speed. Roll starting level flight, so don't be tempted to put the nose up. That's cheating. You will need to push a dabber down elevator in as the aircraft transitions through inverted. Don't worry too much about trying to use rudder in the 90-degree and 270-degree portions just yet. That comes later. But if you're applying down elevator here, do take it off as the aircraft continues around the roll. It's quite common to to leave the down elevator applied and corkscrew the last part of the roll, or push off heading, or then panic and apply up elevator and corkscrew out downwards, which you really don't want to do. And another common error is to over roll. Very, very rarely see people under roll, and that is more often than not because people have got too much aileron throw. So if you've done as I advise, you should probably avoid the over rolling. And that's it for rolls. There's just one slide on that. It's a simple manoeuvre again, but hard to do well. But do learn to roll left and right, as in the direction of rotation. Do learn to roll upwind and downwind. So there's 4 combinations. And once you've got the hang of doing one roll, try 2 rolls. Try a roll that hesitates inverted. There's all sorts of different roll combinations to fly. Learn how to fly a slow roll that takes 5 seconds. There's plenty to go out with rolls. Next one's a stall turn. Hard manoeuvre, but looks lovely when you get it right. So the aircraft pulls up into a vertical flight path, stops in the sky, pivots around its yaw axis into a vertically downwards flight path, makes a vertical dive and pulls out to recover. So in this case, it changes the direction of the plane. Key points for this: keep the flight path absolutely vertical going up. If there's any wind blowing, either a headwind or a side wind, you're going to have to lean the aircraft to make sure it tracks vertically. Then we reduce the power, not to idle, or you'll have no rudder authority, but keep it about quarter power. And then as the plane comes to a stop, smoothly apply the rudder, and the plane will rotate over and drop into vertical dive. Release the rudder, throttle to idle, just fly a vertical dive and pull out. I do recommend stall turning into the wind. I know the B certificate requires something different, but for aerobatic flying in a competition type environment, it's much easier to stall turn your aircraft into whatever wind is blowing from the side. A lot of aircraft as well, they tend to pitch up as you rotate over the top of the stall turn. So some down elevator is quite useful as you're getting beyond the horizontal on the fuselage and coming down into the vertical dive. And as I say, smooth pull out and stall turn into a crosswind. That's stall turns. Spin, that's always a contentious one. Spins described as an auto rotation. So it's a partly stalled manoeuvre where one wing is deeply stalled and one wing is lifting slightly. So the aircraft drops. It's a falling manoeuvre in a corkscrew type configuration. And you fly a set number of turns, stop the aircraft spinning and recover. So this one does need the correct center of gravity. If you set it up right, your aircraft will spin fine. Use the high rate elevator for this manoeuvre and this manoeuvre only. Switch it in before you get there, so it doesn't sort of jerk the aircraft into a climb, and you can switch it out after you finish the manoeuvre. But the entry needs to be flown slowly, spin into wind, reduce the power, raise the nose of the aircraft until it slows down, and then finally you'll reach the stall, and the aircraft will either stall and drop one wing, or if it's really well set up, it'll stall nice and straight. So whichever it does, apply rudder in the direction that either it's going or the direction you want it to go, if it's fallen straight. Apply aileron if you need to. Count the number of turns, count them out loud because people lose count, not surprisingly, because they're concentrating so hard. And release the controls to drop out of the spin, fly a nice vertical down line, and smoothly apply elevator to do a quarter loop back into level flight, applying power again. Just a final couple of points on spins. As I say, count the turns, don't be shy, count them out loud. That vertical down line at the end makes it look a nicer manoeuvre, so it's always good to start at the right height. The use of aileron in a spin is sometimes a bit controversial. I've just made 2 points on it. It's not a crime to use aileron, and it's not a crime to not use aileron. Some aircraft need it, some aircraft don't. You can adjust the spin rotation speed with aileron, but you use whatever you find is right for you. Be patient. Spins take a while to learn. It's like stall turns. Your success rate at first might be less than 50%. But on a spin particularly, do adjust your control surface deflections so that the aircraft will spin reliably. So it may need a little bit more elevator than I suggested. Depends on the design. Just some general stuff then. We'll come at the end and wrapping up and realise time's marching on. As I said, adjust your control throws to get consistent spins. Learn how to fly all the manoeuvres in different directions, left and right, flying from left to right, rolling from left to right. Learn inverted flight. Aerobatic flights, quite often you'll spend a minute or two of your 8-minute flight inverted. So get confident flying inverted, do circuits to the left and right, fly 2 minutes inverted, fly 5 minutes inverted. Just build your confidence at doing that. Get used to the attitude of the aircraft. Keep making notes, touched on that a few times, because you will forget between your flights what you've been learning. So if you haven't got your mate with you, write something down after your flight. If you've got your friend, get them scribbling down stuff so that you can refer back to it. And finally, touched on it earlier, again, Buckminster. If you're going to only fly in the calm, you're not going to fly enough. So get used to flying in a wind. So, you know, we're in the UK here. You have to get used to that. Right, very, very quickly. I just want to knock a few myths out of the way. Some of this I was prompted by some of the feedback on the advertising for the session. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder, or the beer holder, as Andy said. I don't think aerobatic planes are ugly, but I fly them. But I don't think free flight F1A and B and C are ugly either. They've got long spindly wings and high aspect ratio. They're beautiful, they fly great. Control line aerobatic planes, big wings, short moment arm, look lovely, fly great. You get the drift here. Planes are designed to do certain things. A fun fly plane will not fly good knife edge. That aircraft there has got a deep fuselage and short, stubby wings for a biplane. It'll roll well, it'll fly all day on its side. It's built for a purpose. So if you don't like the look of it, I'm sorry about that, I do. But I wouldn't knock any design of plane. And believe me, planes have been under development for as long as aviation's been going on, and absolutely nothing flies better than the latest design. I'm not just saying that. That plane, that's the one I'm flying now, that's the best plane I've ever flown. Right. Those of a certain age will know where I got that picture from. Sorry, it's a bit fuzzy. We are not aloof. We come from all walks of life. We're just like you. We enjoy flying. We don't think our gear is fantastic, and we don't particularly like paying a lot of money for it either. I wish they were cheaper. But you know, the planes last for hundreds of flights. They last for thousands of flights. So on a cost of flight basis, they're not massively expensive compared to something that will fall apart after a season's flying. I've got planes with several hundreds of flights on. They still look good as new. So we don't believe we're elitist. So come and talk to us. We love doing what we do, and we love talking about it. You don't need the super duper plane, I've said there. If you've read your BMFA news this month, if you get it, that's Russ Bowie. He started this season. That's a Miss Wind 50 that I showed you earlier on. And he's been very successful with that plane this year. So as a newcomer, standard plane, not massively expensive, standard radio. He went flying a lot, learnt his trade, and he's done really well this year. So you can do that too. Myth or semi-myth? It's a boring discipline, right? I will admit it's not a spectator sport. If you'd like to be a judge, please come and talk to us. that judging's tough as well. But one advantage I can give you for being a judge is you get to sit down all day and everybody else is trying to impress you. And you don't have to get your hands cold flying. Or do it like I do it there at the height of summer. So if you think you're getting bored, try flying downwind, try rolling left instead of right. I've touched on that a few times. There's plenty to challenge you here. I've often seen comments about stick modes and how to hold the transmitter stick. So mode 1's best, mode 2's best. No. If you watch a video of any of the world's top flyers, you will not be able to tell what mode they're flying. You also won't be able to tell whether they use a finger thumb grip or just thumbs. Whatever you've learnt with, whatever you're comfortable with, you can fly absolutely great just like that. So don't get hung up about that. And finally, we've got to the end. You're probably glad to hear I've talked quite a bit. If you want to know more, come and join us at Buckminster or get in touch with the Great Britain Radio Control Aerobatic Association. All the links are on the BMFA website or in the BMFA news or on Facebook. The GBRCA is the specialist body that covers radio control aerobatics. As I say, we're all keen to help. We're enthusiastic about what we do. I guarantee you a warm welcome. Come along and watch the competition. And if you've done a bit of practice and put some of the things I've covered tonight into practice, let's see you at a competition, and you'll get a warm welcome, as I say. So that is it. I've overrun my time a little bit, so apologies for that. But I think at this point we open it up for questions.
Kevin, thank you very much indeed. Fantastic, extremely comprehensive, and there's already a few plaudits coming in saying well done and excellent, and you held the audience extremely well. We've got about a dozen questions or more that we're going to take you through here. First one is from Gary Nunn. What do you think of the FMS Olympus as a starter package?
Absolutely fine. I've seen people come along to the intro days with that aircraft, and it's got all the characteristics you're looking for. It's a mid-wing design. It's light, it's straight, it's easy to put together and set up and repeatable. Everything I've described tonight is well within the capabilities of that plane. So if you've got one of those, great.
Fantastic. Christopher Kendall, my TX Spectrum DX6 talks about aileron movement as a percentage. What is 10 degrees as a percentage?
Okay. You'll probably find that 100% gives you about 30 degrees on a standard servo arm and control surface horn. So I tend to fly my aircraft with about 35% deflection for that 10 degrees of aileron throw. But in case you've got different size servo arms or control horns, you don't have to use protractors and things like that. You can just get a simple plastic ruler and line it up against your control surface to give you some idea.
Fantastic. Well, you've just answered Mark Duffy's question in one there as well, so fantastic. Richard Doherty, my gliders have aileron differential. For aerobatics, should this not be set up? Question mark. Not to start with. It depends a lot on the relative height of the aircraft's wing to the thrust line. The aircraft will tend to roll at a point somewhere between the thrust line and the wing center line. Sometimes aileron differential will help you get a more axial roll, but that's probably for another session. So my advice is to set up the same amount of up and down to start with. Right, thank you. Richard Clouting, do you relate CG to Mach or simply rely upon the designer's dimensions? I go from what the designer says. I do fine tune it to my own preferences afterwards. But again, that's probably one for another time because it affects the way that the aircraft will fly in knife edge flight and things like that, which I've deliberately not gone into tonight. Brilliant, thank you. Right, Stephen Houghton. Kevin, do you use full aileron deflection for most or all rolls? Yeah, that's a great question, and I wish I'd covered it, so I'll cover it now. The answer is no. I use about 80% of the stick movement for most of my rolls. The reason for that is that in some of the more complex maneuvers,
the aircraft's airspeed will be falling off towards, say the top of a long vertical climb. And that's the time when I use 100% deflection. And that will give me an even roll rate around the maneuvers. So it's very airspeed dependent. And most of the time I'm not flying on full power. So I don't use full aileron.
Brilliant, thank you. Michael Campbell, are there any reasonably priced IC models for a 40-46 for aerobatic training? I flew a Dave Smith Sapphire 40 many years ago while still a learner in highish winds, and it was fantastic. Smooth, just goes where it's pointed, ignored the wind.
Yeah, a great design, not the most modern design. So compared to the modern aircraft, it's it looks a bit sort of spindly and narrow fuselage. That said, there's nothing wrong with that plane if you've got something like that. The planes I showed at the start of the presentation, although they are designed for electric flight, they will take a 46 size two-stroke engine, and I've seen them flown on those, and they'll perform just as well as the electric setup. So if IC is your thing, any of the type of plane I've mentioned tonight are ideal. You just need to either make an adapter or buy it. I think you can get an adapter kit for IC for some of those.
Yeah, thank you. William Le Mesurier, can all these manoeuvres be done with trainer aircraft? I think you answered that one at the start, but
an initial training aircraft, not really. So I'm talking the slow flying flat bottom wing section type aircraft. But you know, the UK's favourite sport aircraft, the What For, let me name it, will do all of those manoeuvres, but it won't do them quite as well as the type of plane that you're looking at in the final slide there.
Right, Terry Rigdon, what is the function of the extra little wings some aircraft have on top of the cockpit?
Right, the so-called canalizer. It's an aerodynamic tweak. So if you can still see my mouse there, it's this thing that we're talking about. Very common on monoplanes. Its function is to deflect some of the airflow back over the rudder, which would otherwise spill away from the top of the rudder to increase the rudder authority. That said, some people have either taken them off or had them depart in flight and not noticed any difference. So don't get hung up on whether your plane's got one or not. Try it and see if it works, but it's not an essential fitment. If you look at those aircraft there, there's 4 or 5 monoplanes that don't have one. So it's not absolutely essential.
Right. Question still coming in fast and furious here. Peter Harvey, what are your thoughts on simulators?
Simulators are good for learning the basic stick movements and coordination, particularly for combination maneuvers. I touched on things like rolling circles and rolling loops. They're quite good for that. The disadvantage of a simulator is this bit about your hard focus on the aeroplane and on a soft focus on your periphery. A simulator, because of the limits of the screen, doesn't give you the peripheral vision. So I can fly a schedule on a simulator and all the maneuvers look great. And then when I come down to the landing position, I find that I've flown most of it at 90 degrees to where I thought I was, because I've not had the reference of the ground. So they're okay up to a point. They're good for learning sequences if you want to learn a sequence of maneuvers that you fly in a competition. So some uses, but you'll not become a world champion flying a simulator. You need to get out and do it for real.
Brilliant. Thank you. Paul Wainwright asks, my model needs elevator during knife edge to keep it straight. Is it possible to trim this out or set a switch?
Both is the short answer. Trimming it out will depend on adjusting the centre of gravity. So it may need the centre of gravity moving backwards or forwards to do that. But that might bring some other undesirable characteristics in. So it's there's never a perfect solution to these. But as I touched on, the capability of modern radios means that you can also set up a mix where if you apply rudder deflection, that you'll get some elevator movement to correct for that. So try to trim it out with adjustments, but your backstop is a mix on the transmitter.
Great, thank you. John Ray asks, do you have to have a B test before you can enter an aerobatic competition?
No, you don't. There is a change you're bringing in, but not till 2022. So I'm talking on the basis that we'll get a full flying season in 2021. So I'm one of life's optimists, but it's hard to be at the moment. But right at this moment, an A certificate is what you need to enter our starter classes. And in fact, any of our classes, the BMFA Nationals, you do need a B certificate for that. That's a Nationals requirement. But from 2022, we're bringing in a requirement to have a B certificate for the more advanced classes.
Brilliant, thank you. John Whiten, please describe the role of the caller and how essential it is one for training and comps.
Very useful for training and even more useful at a competition. When you're flying a sequence in a competition, with the pressure of having to perform it to the best of your ability, even if you've flown it 100 times before, there's always the possibility that you might forget something. So just having somebody prompting the next maneuver is really helpful. And they can also spot glaring errors that you might have made and not seen as a pilot. So this bit I said about losing your peripheral vision and having the aircraft fly off in a direction you don't want it to, your caller is a second set of eyes who doesn't have to look at the plane closely all the time. So they can be your peripheral vision for you. And that helps both in training and in competition. That said, there are some really good pilots who fly without a caller. But if you've got one, I'd recommend flying with one.
Cool. Raymond Chapper asks, hi Kevin, how necessary is it is the exponential thing? I don't usually use it as a rule. I tried it once, but I couldn't get used to the loss or of feel at the lower range of the stick movement, and I miss the one-to-one feel of not using expo. I actually like twitchiness, and I find it easier, quicker to get out of the sticky situations.
Okay, two answers. One answer is if you're comfortable without it, that's fine. But you might have given the game away with the last bit of the question there. I'd have to watch you fly. To be smooth around neutral and fly very repeatable straight lines without any twitchy corrections, exponential's a great asset. If you can do it without exponential, then great. But I would persist with it because it does make things that little bit easier. Once you've got used to it, you'll probably not want to go back. But if you're absolutely confident, and the design of your aircraft might be like that, then fly without. But if you do this, if you have this tendency to over-roll or over-correct, then a bit of expo will help you just damp that out.
Thank you. Right, we'll do two more questions and then we'll just go on to a couple of more, otherwise, because these are still coming through, and I think we'll be here all night if we're not careful.
Hey, I've got all night.
Yeah, well, you've got another.
Everybody else has, I know.
I know you've offered for another session at some stage later on in the year, so that may be the one to take to move. But Terry Ridgen asks, once upon a time, aerobatic models used trike undercarriage, UC. Now tail draggers seem the norm. Why?
Couple of reasons. Takeoff and landing aren't judged in international class events any longer. It's to try and make the flights a bit quicker. So there's no need to have them looking beautiful on the ground. And the sort of surfaces we fly from means that a takeoff is, even on a mown grass surface, can be a little bit unpredictable if you hit a little divot or something like that. So the best thing to do is get the aircraft into the air. And there's a weight penalty as well with a tricycle undercarriage, and particularly with retracting undercarriage that we used to use. We've got the power to weight ratio now is absolutely great. So the simplest of undercarriages are built into the design, and that's all we need these days.
Brian Shoulders, do you use or recommend the use of gyros in competition aircraft?
No, and I can't endorse it because they're not permitted in competition flight. That's easy.
Right, Robert Welford, how do you set up the spring tension on your transmitter?
Another good one. Personally, I use the spring tension that they come with. It's personal preference again. To get a predictable neutral, and as I say, if you trim the plane for good straight and level flight, hands off, the more stick tension, the better. So if you want to experiment, I would try increasing your stick tension, but don't decrease it.
And right, let's take this. I think we'll take this one as the last one. I thought this was, where are we now? Yeah, from Aldi. How critical is motor thrust line deflection in ensuring aeros are crisp?
Fairly critical. Go for what the designer said. So if you're flying a single propeller, which as most people do, whether it's a 2 or 3 blade, usually a couple of degrees of right thrust will be built in, and usually a degree or so of down thrust as well. Depends on the plane. Some biplanes have up thrust, but that's a sort of fine tuning issue. If you find on long vertical climbs that the aircraft is yawing off to one side, it's often a side thrust issue. Certainly, if I come back and do another session at some time, or the questioner wants to contact me directly, we can talk through that. The detail of that is probably one for another session. But yes, it's important.
Kevin, thank you very much. Andy, have you spotted any other in the chat there? There's about 26 or 27 comments, most of them saying, thanks, Kevin, well done, great quality, brilliant. You've got plenty of plaudits there. So I just wondered if there was anything else you'd spotted whilst I was reading questions.
Most of them are comments. As I said, why not go through these last 5 questions that are in the question and answer?
Go on, off you go then.
James Hounslow actually asked the very first question, so
I missed that one.
Stop him waiting. He says, I was always taught to use sub-trim to get the servo horn exactly to 90 degrees, unless you were trying to drive the servo electronically to around 150 degrees. By using sub-trim, you should still get equal and proportional deflection in both directions. He says he wouldn't, of course, use it to level the control surfaces. Can you explain why using sub-trim is a bad idea in terms of trimming later?
Yeah. The point about the deflection and 150% thing is absolutely right. Your servos still deflect exactly what the stick says, even with sub-trim. It's just that when you start to fine-tune things with, say, 4 aileron servos on a biplane and 2 elevator servos on most planes, and you get the transmitter pictogram up, which shows where the servos are deflecting. At full stick, you've then got to subtract the amount of sub-trim. So you might get, say you've got 2% or 2 steps of sub-trim on one elevator. When you push full down elevator, you might have 42 degrees and 40. And you've got to adjust for that all the time. And when you're starting out, it's better to have everything reading 0, so that you know that everything's deflecting equally. But in my experience, using the brand of radio that I showed you earlier on, you will find either a 4 or a 6 arm servo arm that will give you 90 degrees on your arm without any sub-trim. So I fly on my aircraft with no sub-trim.
Steve Houghton asks, do you use full aileron deflection for most or all of your rolls?
I think we might have covered that one earlier on, but no was the answer. Only when the airspeed is low.
And how critical is...
That one was done.
That's gone, is it? Thanks.
It's because you're so popular, Kevin, don't worry.
Davith Hayward, trimming first straight and level flight, do you do that into wind?
Yes, preferably. You can't always, because you might be at a field where you can only fly up and down the flight line and there might be a crosswind. But if you have got the opportunity to go up and downwind, it's easier to see what's going on. But I would recommend trying in both directions, up and downwind. Even better, do all that work on one of those rare calm days that we get.
Yeah, fair enough. Andy's also got another question. He says elevator aileron throw will be dependent to some extent on model. Yeah, and maybe more than you have specified, question mark.
Yes, absolutely. I was describing the setup on my aircraft, but the ones you see in the picture there, the Sebart planes, things like that, they've got similar control surface proportions. So the sort of competition or semi-competition designs tend to have similar percentage of wing for aileron and elevator. So that's a good starting point. But do try it. But if you want to put if you want 12 degrees rather than 10, okay. But I wouldn't recommend 20 because it will just make things too twitchy. You've got to persist with these changes. Give it 10 flights and then see what you think.
Brilliant, thank you. Now, a couple of important ones in the chat there. Learned loads, many thanks, brilliant. Thanks, gents. Infinitely better and far more interesting than watching television. Great presentation. Please do another to discuss setting the plane up for the best performance. This may be the most important for self-build planes, perhaps. Great seminar. Great talk, Kevin. Let's hope we can go back to flying in 2021. Thanks, Kevin. Well presented and all good advice at any level. Thank you, Kevin. Thoroughly enjoyable and very useful brief. I now need to go out and practice. And one for me, your audio sounds very muffled. Well, apologies because it's the end of the day now. I've just got that, but we'll get something sorted out for the next session, I think, for that one. Right.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody for the comments. So apologies it overran, but I hope I covered a lot of ground, and I hope it's relevant to people. And thank you for the great questions and engagement as well. So as I said, we think we're a friendly bunch, but you have to come and talk to us to find out. But above anything, we're enthusiasts and we like talking about what we do, and that applies to all branches of model flying. But if this one's taking your fancy, then come along and talk. And if we want some more of this or go into a little bit more detail, quite happy to come back and do it again.
Fantastic, thank you. Andy, anything from you?
No, I was going to ask a question, but in fact, Andy Simon's already answered it. It was a question in the chat about videos. I read on and saw it. Now, that was a great presentation. There was a lot of good stuff that was, most of it, very useful for sports flyers, I have to say, and not just aerobatics. So very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
A quick reminder that next week is Peaking to Scale Aero Modelling with Doug Hunt.
Oh.
I've just put a link in the chat box a moment or two ago if you want to get on there and get signed up for that if you haven't already.
Fantastic. No, that is brilliant. And we look forward to seeing everybody. We had topped out about 273. I made it probably 274 attendees. So that's a new BMFA record. So yeah, thank you for that. Let's see if we can top it next Tuesday. And we welcome everybody back.
Yeah, and I think it doesn't leave much to say other than have a very, very safe and enjoyable Christmas. And thank you for joining us.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Right, and the nights are drawing out now.